Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Vickers, and I'm the lead researcher on season 2 of Canada's game shows and a 12-time game show contestant. You have just watched the Game TV broadcasts of episode 203, Comedy and Game Shows, and episode 204, Prizes. With me tonight, live from California, is Adam Nedeff, panelist from this season and noted game show author. Thank you so much for. What's that you have there, Adam?
God, this is a good book. Oh, hi. I didn't hear you come in. Ryan,
Yes, Adam?
one of my favorite things I see on TV all the time. Oh, hi.
Oh, hi.
If,
Exactly.
if I had a pipe to smoke, I would have done that. Thank you very much for having me, and please extend that to everyone involved in the production of this show, because it's been a real treat to be involved with this.
Yeah, and we've been lucky enough, Adam, to have you not on this season, but also on last year's season as well. And just a reminder to our viewers that you are more than happy to go hop on to the Game TV website, and all episodes from last season are already there. You can come and catch up. So we're here to discuss the episodes you've just seen on Game TV. Hopefully you've had a chance to watch them. Please feel free to leave us any questions you might have, and we will try our best to answer them.
And for anyone who has had a chance to watch them, let me emphasize this is what my hair normally looks like. Here's the interesting thing about doing this in the time of COVID is I'm cutting my own hair. So I had just gone to Target and bought a set of clippers and just completely swooped off everything, just for the sake of comfort. And then a week later, I get the call from the folks at Game TV saying, "Hey, we're doing a second season. Can you go ahead and give us an interview via Zoom?" Oh, yeah, I guess. So
I know I've had that several times. I was trying to time for my day job when we'd have to go back and how many times I was going to put the clippers through. So my big thing was I'd cut my hair, but I was not doing my eyebrows. I didn't care how bushy they were. I did not trust myself. Which, you know what? That wonderfully unscripted banter leads well into comedians and game shows.
yeah.
Thoughts off the top, Adam? Do you feel that comedians have done a good job last number
Oh,
of years
yeah.
hosting game shows?
Comedians do a good job when they're in a good vehicle, in a good role. Not every comedian is a good fit for every show. Not every show is a good fit for every comedian. But when they come together, it works very, very well. One of the things that's very advantageous is when a comedian's sense of humor becomes a fingerprint for the show. And I think a good example of that would be Family Feud over the years. Richard Dawson had a very dry and very biting, low-key sense of humor. Ray Combs was more chipper and more upbeat with his sense of humor. And fast forward to today, where Steve Harvey is very in your face and very out there with his remarks. Every comedian's sense of humor has become the sense of humor that Family Feud runs on.
Mhm.
So that's an example of what's good when a comedian and a game show mesh well. The comedian's identity becomes the show's identity. And if you have a comic that you like hosting a good game, you're going to watch that.
And it's interesting because we have what was said on the show, our national treasure of Colin Mockery, who really has only done one true game show up here, which is kind of a shame. And he did
Yeah.
Canadian Fifth Grader, and that only ran for 5 episodes, unfortunately.
And one of the things that I want to touch on, which it's going to seem redundant in light of what just aired, but he just strikes me as somebody that your mother would look at and say, he seems nice.
Yes,
He
agreed.
just gives off that air, even when he's doing the most ridiculous stuff on Who's Line, or like I said, it's hard to find a comedian who just seems nice. But Colin just seems nice.
And you know what? I found that I was lucky enough to go to one of the tapings for Canadian Fifth Grader, and he's just sort of happy to be there and the great interplay with the children.
Yeah.
And we saw a couple of clips of something called Super Town Challenge, which is not very well known, and that was a parody of game shows. So you would have the town of Love, BC, playing against Hope, Saskatchewan. And the idea is that it presented itself as a real game show, but for those of you who know, the Red Green Show, made by the same people that way.
Oh,
So he fit in that well as well.
okay.
Go ahead, sorry.
Well, the other thing I wanted to say about humor is one of the things that really helps if you have a funny host is humor really props up a game that's not going well. Humor is the salvation of a game that's played badly. If you have two contestants who aren't doing very well, the numbers on the scoreboard aren't getting bigger, the things aren't lighting up because they're not giving the correct answers, the game board is static when the game is being played poorly. It's just the way it works out. A game show played badly can be a very, very dull thing, and a game show host can swoop in and save the day if they can make a funny teasing remark towards the contestant without hurting them, that really saves it, and saves it to the point that, just as an example on Match Game, is there anything better than an episode of Match Game that's played poorly?
Oh, yes. And we have a barn burner. It's a 1-0 win at the end
Yeah,
of 4 tiebreaker rounds.
the
So
pitcher's duel, as Gene Rayburn would call it. Yeah,
exactly. And that's the thing too that we saw with Match Game up here, because we had um, there was some thought that the contestants were not the strongest game show contestants you could ever have. And
yeah,
Darren Rose, having been doing comedy for a long time, could sort of poke the bear
yeah.
and have good fun with that. So I
Oh
do love
yeah,
the fact that he talks about it really not. I think you can speak this a little better than I can, but Match Game is a wonderful show, but as a game, it's not the strongest thing in the world.
it's really not. There was a clash very, very early in the series about an episode that Mark Goodson had deemed a bad episode, and he brought in Gene Rayburn and Ira Skutch, who was the producer, and Robert Sherman, who was the head writer, and excoriated them for this bad episode that he had seen when he was in the studio for the previous day's taping, because the game ended in a 0-0 tie. And I guess they ended the show without even making it to the bonus round. Just the 30 minutes ran out before they could make it to super match because the game was moving so slowly. And everyone was kind of making the point, well, the reason the game moved so slowly was because it was so much fun. The contestants were giving clever answers, but they were too clever for their own good, so they weren't
Mm-hmm.
matching. And Gene demanded an explanation from them, so they were explaining their answers. And then the celebrities were going really off the wall with their answers, and they were giving explanations and telling stories and contextualizing their answers. And that led to a lot of back and forth interplay with Gene and with the other panelists. And Ira Skutch at one point said to Mark, this conversation was relayed to me. He said, if you want a fast-moving, high-scoring, successful game, we can do that. We can write the question, name a type of pie,
Mm-hmm.
and all 6 of the celebrities are going to say apple, and the contestant is going to say apple, and we'll say, okay, stars, reveal your answers. Apple, 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 apple. And that's going to be a fast-paced game, and it's going to be high-scoring, but is that honestly better television than the bad game that we taped yesterday?
And that's the thing I found. Like, I love to hear these behind the scenes stories. And Darren Rose related a clip that I believe it was in season 1 that Janine Garofalo was kind of just writing these novels and just not making the matches. And
Yeah.
I had this vision of some wonderful person sitting at the desk at CTV, because it was done through the Comedy Channel, or the Comedy Network up here, which is owned by CTV, and getting complaints that they weren't matching well enough.
Yeah.
Well, there is a debate about that for Match Game, if it should be more game or comedy, right?
I mean, there is a debate, and one of the things that the compromise that everyone in the U.S. who's a game show fan has talked, well, everyone in the U.S. Having spoken to every game show fan in the U.S., I can say
Really? Was that part of the
no,
research for the book?
yes,
Okay,
no.
fair enough.
What I should say is generally what you read when game show fans discuss Match Game online is there. That's a better way to phrase it.
Oh, fair enough.
Generally, the agreement is it's okay to do badly in round 1, but in round 2, you should hunker down and actually try to do well and match these celebrities. So round 1 is fun time, and round 2 is the actual game. And what Janine was doing was just classic Brett Summers. Brett would use 3 or 4 cards for each of her answers, and just give these really bizarre, descriptive, intricate stories almost as answers, and just write down the whole thing, writing novels. But she was a regular panelist for years and years, even not being the strongest player that they had on that panel. And the reason they brought it back, they kept bringing her back, was because she was a fun antagonist. She would argue with Charles Nelson Riley sitting next to her, and she would argue back and forth with Gene. And because even if she wasn't matching, at least it was fun. That's a very thin line to walk, because you could be costing somebody money. So you don't want to just outright cost somebody money. But if it's a question that's broad and there's 100 different answers that you could give for it anyway, and it's very unlikely that you're going to zero in on the one thing that this person is thinking, go ahead and have fun with that question. When you get to round 2 where, there are 1 or 2 really good answers, and I've got to figure out which one this contestant is saying, that's when you hunker down and get serious and actually try to figure out what they said.
I feel the best quote I ever heard was, I believe it's Charles Nelson Riley said, it's not what is it? It's a
It's
game. It's
not a
not a,
show, it's a social
and
engagement.
that's the best way of summarizing Match Game, I think, of any version we've ever had.
Oh yeah.
Um, so we were talking before briefly. So up here we have Dragon's Den, and your
Yeah.
equivalent in the US is Shark Tank.
Hmm.
There's a different vibe for that up here, and it really kind of lends to comedy. We had one of the panelists talking about how the production company or the licensing company was kind of worried that we were playing it for humor, but it's really worked up here.
Yeah,
Um,
in the US, we have Shark Tank, which is played. There are light moments, and I think really what our version goes for is a mix. From what I perceive, there's one, generally speaking, in a given episode, you'll see one really silly, oddball idea, and
mhm.
the sharks will have fun with it. But primetime reality shows in the US generally skew towards how much drama can we get out of this. So we have the very tense, violin-driven music track in the background during the show. We have the narrator who brings us back from commercial by saying that the Sharks have offered $300,000 for 20%, but will that offer be accepted? And we have the cuts and we have the B-roll zoom in on the contestants on the inventor's face, or whatever you
Mhm.
want to call them. I guess if they're sharks, they're not really contestants. They're chum, I suppose is what you would call them.
Well, yes, and shark terms, not their
Yes.
friends, as in chum. That's for
Entrepreneurs
sure.
is the
So,
word that I'm grasping for.
yeah.
But yeah, you see that tight zoom in on the entrepreneur's face, like, oh, yeah, we go for drama in the U.S. or the networks and the producers here in the U.S. tend to go for drama on reality shows.
Well, and
Um,
also, I've also find in a slight comparison of Big Brother Canada, Big Brother US, I realize that we have taken more of a format that's the mix between the US and Europe, but I just don't see a lot of other versions having a moose head
yeah,
giving you tasks. And I
and
think that's
I
where
have
sort
to
of the
say, as
fun
an
is.
American, like, is that going for a Canadian stamp, or could it have just as easily been a duck head?
It probably
Like, of
could,
all
but I
animals
feel
you
like
landed on, you
that's
went for
just
a
sort
moose.
of that's sort of just the way we are, and it's a little more playfulness of
Okay,
the Canadian version. I feel.
yeah.
Listen, I think we find this in Canada and the States, the panel show just not working over here that much, and we're having really good success because news started in 2015 and became a TV show last year, but it seems to be doing well for the CBC.
Yeah, the panel show has had an interesting history in the U.S. It's been dusted off a bit with ABC. ABC has had some luck with To Tell the Truth, which is
Correct.
the closest thing we have now to a panel show, even though they do it a little bit differently.
Mhm.
Match Game has a celebrity panel, but it's not what you call a panel show. The definition of panel show is basically it's the panel playing a guessing game using
Correct.
some other element, like the contestant across the stage from them, or something else they have to discern.
Mhm.
Um, Here's what I think the history of the panel show is and why we haven't had much success with it. Uh, Panel shows were ubiquitous in the 1950s. We had What's My Line? I've Got a Secret to Tell the Truth. The name's the same: Masquerade Party, Who Pays, Who's the Boss, Who's, Why. There were a lot of different panel shows in the
Mhm.
1950s, to the point that it was identified with the time period. And as game shows evolved, more and more ideas came along, and fewer of the new ideas were panel shows, to the point that the panel shows were relegated to the era where they were popular. In the 1980s, there was an attempt at doing something called Everything's Relative.
Yep.
And it was a panel show. They would bring out a contestant, and you had to guess who their famous relative was. And it looks very, very out of place in the Wheel of Fortune / Price is Right 1980s. It looks
Which were
like,
huge, huge
yeah,
shows at that time. Not
it
they
is a
aren't,
very out
they
of place
still are,
show.
but especially in the
Yeah,
80s, right?
and I'm not saying that Everything's Relative was a bad show, but it just feels like it doesn't belong in this decade. It's so out of place. Uh, and then you had the following decade, Figure It Out, which was pretty much I've Got a Secret.
Oh,
And
very
again,
much
they
so.
gussied it up, so it was a panel show, but it also had these elements of varieties where sometimes the kids would sing or they would demonstrate an animal trick after the fact. Something like that. They had the Charade Brigade and the Secret Slime action. So there was other stuff going on. So they had a lot of window dressing on top of this panel show. I just think it's created this situation where panel shows are seen as something that did exist, as
Mhm.
opposed to something that can still exist. I think that's what happened. That's my guess, but I think that's why we're not seeing a lot of them now, is because I think they're just identified with an era. And if you try to bring along a new one, people are just going to look at it and say, "Well,
Well, and that's why it's been welcomed for Because News, and as Crawford, the host, explained it, it tests the panelists, their knowledge of the news, or clearly the
Yeah.
lack thereof.
Yeah.
And there was an earlier iteration of that, but it was done with civilians, and then they
Mhm.
decided to reformat it with celebrities. So let's move on to prizes. Um, uh, Adam, you've been on a couple of game shows over the years, right?
Mhm.
Is there any
I've
kind
won.
of prize that you won that stuck out in your mind?
Believe it or not, I've never won a prize. Everything I ever won on a game show was cash.
No lovely
So
parting gifts?
no lovely parting gifts at all. I do remember when I was a contestant on Catch 21, and this is kind of a peek behind the curtain. There was a bonus prize for the first contestant every episode who got 21. And they told us during the briefing, okay, so here's the situation. You are going to win a bonus prize today if you get 21 on the nose in the main game. And without bogging you down with the details of how the business works, we're not sure what your prize is going to be. It is either, here's what they explained. They said it is either going to be an Xbox or a vacation in Europe. We don't know yet. So if
Well,
you
those
win
aren't too
and if you
bad
get
prizes. They're
21,
considerably different,
yeah,
mind you. So,
if you get 21, you need to react in a way that looks believable for either one. You need to react in a way that looks like you know, as opposed to winning an Xbox versus winning a Ferrari,
oh,
which would be
that's
two
fair.
wildly
That's
different
fair.
reactions. Basically, it was this instant acting class where you'd have to decide, okay, what would I definitely do if I won either of those prizes? I would clap and nod my head. I would smile. So I'm going to clap and nod my head and smile when they announce you won the bonus prize. And then in post production, that's when they are going to add the thing announcing what my prize is.
Wonderful.
Um,
That's great. That's why I like having these discussions. Just hear sort of the behind the scenes
yeah.
things. Wh- I find it amazing, and I don't think it's a wrong thing, but that we hear of people quitting their job to go on these bigger competition reality shows.
I
Um,
mean, it depends on the job.
yeah.
If your job is meaningless to you versus a chance at hundreds of
Mhm.
thousands of dollars, yeah, definitely go move into the Big Brother house for a little while and see what happens. Because if your job matters that little to you, you can just as easily go back after you've been fired and probably find a job at the same skill level and at the same pay rate, and you've not missed anything.
Well,
So
and
I've
there was go ahead, sorry.
I've never felt tempted to take that gamble. I never saw anything that would make me inclined to do that, but I'm definitely my hat's off to anybody who was willing to take that chance.
Well, and the thing is too, from a Canadian perspective, there was many stories about the British version of Deal or No Deal, people quitting their jobs for the chance at £250,000, and then maybe calling home with a tenner, right? So
Yeah.
it is very very much a risk, and we saw our biggest ever Canadian winner was Andrew Oster, who won 300,000 on Canadian fifth grader, which we talk about in this episode, and I would imagine that was a big deal because you'd mentioned this before that we're not paying taxes on our money.
Yeah, that is one of the irritating things about American game shows is you do get taxed on your winnings, and even worse than that, there was a time prior to the 1980s where you could do income tax averaging. You were allowed prior to the 1980s, if you had a weird year financially, like you got a big inheritance or you won a big cash prize, just any kind of weird year financially, the IRS would allow you to figure out your average income from the past 5 years and pay taxes on that. So
Mhm.
whatever you want on a game show, you would still take a hit on that, but not as bad as you do now because we've gotten rid of income tax averaging. Um, so once again, we found another reason that Canada is superior to the U.S. You don't have that. Yeah, I said
You
it.
you
Uh,
heard it here first. So, but it's also it's interesting to see. We had on James and Anthony, who won the most recent version of Amazing Race Canada that aired about a year ago, and they said part of it wasn't necessarily the money, but just sort of wanted to I think the word carefully, or just quietly, I shouldn't say quietly, maybe a bit more loudly, make aware of certain social causes
yeah.
without sort of shoving it down people's throat. I don't think that's sort of the Canadian way of doing it, but they brought a lot of issues to light in that show.
And that is a delicate subject when you want to deal with that. Generally, game shows, especially in the U.S., tread very, very carefully.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when we did the all new Double Dare, we had a team with same sex parents. We
Yeah.
had and we called the team Double Dads. And the decision was made not to put a spotlight on this, not to hang a lampshade on it. I think we addressed it a little bit. Like
Yeah, I
I
remember
remember
seeing that episode. Yeah.
Liza asked one of the kids, because she was genuinely curious, like, do you call them dad or dad and dad, or do you have different terms for them? And they explained, well, no, we call one dad and we call the other one pop. So it was kind of a nice way to make a little statement there, again, without clubbing it
Mhm.
over people's heads. Um, so yeah, that's a delicate thing to do. And I think also one of the things you want to be careful about is, I do know that people watch game shows to get away.
Agreed.
Game shows are an escape, which is ironic.
And
One of the things,
especially right now, correct?
yeah, and that's kind of one of the funny ironies of game shows, is to do well on a game show, you absolutely need to be aware of the real world, because that's,
Hmm.
if it's Q&A trivia, you need to know what's going on in the outside world. And yet at the same time, you're watching the game show to avoid that. So the line moves back and forth all the time. It's something that you would be totally fine asking a trivia question about in 2017. All of a sudden in 2018, the producers say, let's not talk about that right now because it's going to remind people of this. And then in 2019, it's okay to ask about this subject because people have had time to digest it and they don't think of it in those terms anymore. So the line for that moves back and forth all the time.
And moving on to the second segment, which was sort of the opportunity prizes. So people are not necessarily in it for the money. People may joke about the earworm that is Carly Rae Jepsen's "Call Me Maybe," but at the end of the day, it tracks back to Canadian Idol.
It did, and it's great, and that is an interesting realm of prize, is opportunity.
Mhm.
One of the things that I kind of want to ask about, I'd like to pick a lot of game show fans' brains about this, but there was a time in the 1950s and the 1960s, the original version of The Price is Right had a type of prize that they gave away fairly often that I would classify as an opportunity prize. You could win a business on The Price is Right.
That fascinates me.
You could win a laundromat, or you could win a fast food restaurant. So let me ask you, just speaking personally, Ryan Vickers, if you had a chance to win a pizza franchise on a game show, would you want that? Would you take that prize, and would you make a go
Sure.
of it if you won? Yeah.
Why not? I think we did. Now it's interesting you bring it up. There was a show, and I'm struggling for the name of it. I'd have to go check on it, but it aired in Quebec a few years ago, and you won a Saint Hubert chicken franchise. That was the big playoff for it. And I'm not exactly sure how that ended up happening, if the person chose to take the franchise or not, but it was a big deal, and it was something. So your context, Adam, I don't know if you know Swiss Chalet. It's another Canadian franchise we have up here, but Saint Hubert has been very prolific in Quebec and Eastern Ontario and parts of New Brunswick for many years. So we've had that before, and that's maybe going tops 10 years back.
Yeah. And
But
it's, kind of the American dream, be your own boss.
mhm.
And it gives people the chance, I think, to roll the dice a little bit in their lives. I mean, the chance to actually do something and have your hands in it, as opposed to following orders and saying, well, this is my job because this is the job that I was hired to do. As, taking on your own business and saying, I'm going to make a go of this, and I'm going to try to make this the best fast food franchise there's ever been, and here's how I'm going to do it. And being able to
Well,
roll up your sleeves and do a little something with it.
exactly. I just want to check on my name. So I understand that you had a contestant name. I believe it's Kelly Clarkson. Has she done okay?
He has had
In
quite a career, and I know that Simon really credits her with American Idol being confirmed as the success and the institution that it
Mhm.
became. Simon kind of made the point that Kelly Clarkson wasn't lucky that American Idol came along. We were lucky that we found her, because this was
Yeah.
a chance to show, listen, we have this platform, and for the right person, there's a chance to really launch themselves to stardom if they have the right level of talent. You can have a certain level of talent, but if nobody gives you that opportunity, it doesn't matter. So Kelly Clarkson walking into the show and having that talent and bringing that with her to start off, and seeing her week by week become a star. She was already famous by the time the series ended,
Mhm.
because she had this natural charisma and she had that natural ability. Uh, just watching her become famous was the big thrill of the original American Idol run here.
Well, it's not lost on me that one of our contestants, Melissa O'Neill, who's now gone to do Broadway, Broadway shows, and now is on, I believe, The Rookie with Nathan
Yeah.
Fillion on ABC. It's not lost to me that there was a subplot that her character ended up on American Idol. I'm not sure that was written on purpose, but I like to think it was. But you talk about the opportunity that, we have a very successful chain of fish and chip shops up here that was profiled on the show Halibut House on Dragon's Den. And we talked to one of the owners, and here's someone who got a deal with the dragon but didn't take it. So a lot of the times it's not necessarily the win. We see a Jennifer Hudson, we see an Adam Lambert that doesn't win the show. And quite often they don't need, I don't say they don't need to, but it's the exposure.
It's the exposure. And let me ask you this. In Canada, do you see products with packaging that says "as seen on Dragon's Den"? Is that a thing up there?
Now and then there
Okay.
are specific products that we all know in Canada because
Yeah.
of the show.
No, because that is absolutely a thing in the U.S. where
Mhm.
you will see a label on a product that says "as seen on Shark Tank," and it's interesting the level of instant credibility that gives. It doesn't, you look at it right away, okay, producers looked at this and decided this was an idea worth showing to the sharks. At least one shark looked at this and decided, I'm going to stick money into this. Even if you don't know the product, that's what that label means if you see it in the store. So, already I've decided, oh, yes, if this was seen on Shark Tank, I think I do need to own a special footstool for going to the bathroom. This is something I need in my life now because I've seen it in the department store.
It's funny you mentioned that. I remember being on a road trip a few years ago and I bought something. I didn't know it was been on Shark Tank, but I 100% bought it. And it was basically something that went between the seat and the console in the car, where everything sort of like falls down. And I thought that was a great invention. And
Oh,
that's the
yeah.
thing. Sometimes you find products in things like Dragon's Den and Shark Tank you didn't really think you needed, but you're like, well, at least give that a try
Well,
once,
yeah, I
right?
mean, that's the magic of it. There was a show that I was enamored with in the early 90s. It was a syndicated show and it didn't have a long run, but it was called Why Didn't I Think of That?
I
And
remember that vaguely. Yeah.
it wasn't even a game show or a competition show. It was just straight up, here are inventors showing off the stuff they've invented. And that was it for the entire half hour, and
Mhm.
that's all it was. But that was the fun of it, was I didn't know this existed, but that's a great idea, and why didn't I think of that? Which is why they called it the title. And that's one of the satisfying things I think about watching Dragon's Den or watching Shark Tank, is seeing somebody have a great idea. And it's not just, oh, well, it's a microwave, but our clock is bigger. So,
Mhm.
it's easier to figure out what the time it is, uh, it's, it's actually a useful thing. It's something that improves life, and you don't think about it. It was never anything that was going to occur to you, but once you see it, you're thinking, yes, this is genius. This is something that should exist.
And we sort of segue on that to the typical Canadian prize. Adam, in your years of watching Canadian game shows, what do you think is the prize that you most associate with a Canadian game show?
Super Pay Cards, 1981. I saw this episode. I enjoyed it. I never forgot it. Mary Lou went into the audience, played the audience bonus game. The bonus prize was a fire escape ladder. And
I thought it was, I knew you were
even
going to say something different. That's good.
Mary had to preface it by, she even said to the contestant, "Well, we have a great prize for you, even though we hope you never need it." Like, yeah, that's true.
Um,
You're giving the contestant a prize that you don't really want them to use, ideally.
I was on a show called Inside the Box, which
Yeah.
got some airplay in the States. So TV trivia, basically. I
Mhm.
won $500. I didn't win the bonus round, but that was the minimum guarantee, and I happily took that and had a nice little mini road trip.
Yeah.
And my friends afterward, they said, "No, you need a typical Canadian prize." So they bought me a crock pot. And as much as we joke about that, I'm still using that same crock pot 15 years later, and it makes excellent chili every other week.
I will
So,
tell you a story from, I very, very briefly worked in the prize department for The Price is Right.
oh yes, thank you
Uh,
for bringing that up.
and we didn't have any, The Price is Right has a wide variety of prizes, but I think the closest thing to quote unquote a Canadian prize that we could have had on The Price is Right, um, there was a company that had furnished us with a prize that they wanted featured on The Price is Right. And they contracted with us, they sent us the prize, and they wanted it featured on the show X number of times. And my second day on the job, they told me, "Adam, we need you to call this person." And I said, "Well, what do you need me to call them for?" They said, "They sent us this prize 2 years ago. We have never featured it on the show.
Oh
We've decided we are
dear.
never going to feature it on the show. It
Oh
is never
dear.
going to be on the show. So we need you to call this person and say, hey, this prize is never going to be on The Price is Right, and we are sending it back to you. What address should we send it back? What address should we send it to? The prize was a flagpole,
Well then,
a $900 flagpole.
is that because
And
no flags
Ryan,
came with it?
let me emphasize, no flag. It didn't even come with a flag. We were offering, or they wanted us to offer just a flagpole. And that was it. And they thought that was a great prize for The Price is Right, and they were waiting for us to offer it. And I had to call this guy, and he sat there and simmered and stewed and complained about that. Well, I don't think we got the exposure we were expecting to get from The Price is Right. And dude, it's a flagpole. What were we going to do with this?
It's funny. We have a comment from Ryan. Hello, Ryan from Wisconsin. Great to have you here. And he said the two slice toaster was popular in '89 and '90. And for those of you who've never seen the game show Test Pattern, imagine for the American viewers, it's basically our version of remote control. They're basically going through that. And the ring, and that was the prize that everyone associated on that show. That was what people wanted to win. There was rafting trips and money and things like that, but it's very much, that's a quintessential Canadian prize. So I host Reach for the Top, and the first year I worked at Reach for the Top, before I was hosting, I was a production assistant and was at the provincial championships. And they said, we need you to stretch, Ryan, for 5 minutes. So we started raffling off. We had just a raffle to kill the time before we had the results. I started raffling off tissues, and then the box of tissues came in. And I was that desperate. And I went back the next year. I said, never again. So we started having something basically just junk. So every year it's grown into this monolith that people don't care what they win. They just want to win something.
They want to win something. It is, first of all, it's a status symbol and it's a trophy. I'll revisit my days of being a prize coordinator in a moment, but while I'm thinking about this wavelength, one of the neat things that happens with being a game show collector and having an online presence is people track you down looking for their appearance or looking for a family member's appearance on a game show years back.
Yeah.
And a few years back, I was contacted by somebody who had been a contestant on a show called I Guess on NBC in the 1960s, and they were looking for a tape of their show, and we talked back and forth, and we exchanged messages. And one of the things that this person made it a point to tell me in the email was that one of the prizes he won was a percolator, and the percolator still worked, and that was a point of pride.
That is wonderful.
He had not bought a percolator in 50 years because the one he got on I Guess still worked, and he was so proud of that. And you can imagine what a good feeling that is to walk into your kitchen and see that thing and think it's lasted all these years. I've never had to run out to a department store and pick up a new one. And it just reminds you of the cool thing that you got to do 50 years ago when you had 15 minutes of fame as a game show contestant. Or the other one, I was so delighted by this. Matt Ottinger, a very good friend of mine, unearthed, with the help of another friend of ours, Harold, unearthed a 1957 Price is Right episode that had never been rerun. We found
I know what you're going to talk about, and I think it's yeah. Go ahead.
We found out one of the contestants was still alive. She is 96 years old. Her name is Odell Lumpkin, but I think it was her granddaughter, posted a video on YouTube of her grandmother watching herself on The Price is Right in 1957 and winning a mink stole. And one of the things that we learned from her granddaughter was everybody in the family calls this her Price is Right stole, because we know the family lore of the time that we took a vacation in New York and grandma got picked out of the audience to be a contestant on the next day's episode of The Price is Right, and she won this mink stole. And even though the general attitude about fur has changed over the generations, that stole has remained in her family. And one of the things they said was every girl in the family has worn that stole at some point because it's grandma's Price is Right stole. It's become this heirloom. It's become a memento for the family. And it's just this great story that they have. So that's one of the other great things. Not even necessarily what the thing is, but what it represents. It's the cool thing that grandma did decades ago.
And I think that's a great talking point, because I know that I've been lucky to be on multiple shows, and they took a chuckle at me at Wheel of Fortune because I was not desperate to win money. I was so happy to keep my name tag. Sometimes it's just the simple things in life.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was a page at CBS, and one of the things you have to do as a page at CBS on the day that The Price is Right tapes, you get out a big thick stack of name tags,
Oh.
and you get a big magic marker. You have to make 300 name tags for the members of the audience. And you know what? I did that every taping, and I did it without complaint. And the reason why was because I never got tired of hearing this. So many people would take that name tag from me and say, this is all I wanted. The Price is Right name tag has become such an icon and such a symbol of the show that this was all that mattered to them, was they got to show their friends back home, I got one of these while I was in Los Angeles.
Two quick stories about that. Price is Right, for a number of years, has done a live version. And I went to one, usually they have just a staffer at the theater just fill out your tags. And for whatever reason, they let us do it on our own one year. I don't know why, but I was very insistent with my friends. I'm like, there is a way to do this block lettering. I'm going to be doing this.
There is, because I can tell you from being a page, there is a lettering guide, and the pages
all. Oh, now I didn't know that. That's fascinating to me.
There was a lettering guide at CBS, and I remember you don't put serifs on the letter J, but you do put them on the letter I, except in cases of certain names, because if it's on a certain name, it'll look like initials instead of just looking like the letter I. You do you kind of upward tick the serifs on certain letters. So like on the letter F, you upward tick the 2 lines there. On the letter E, you upward tick on those. The letter R, you make it nice and straight, and it goes at that angle. So yeah, there is a lettering guide that you try to adhere to at The Price is Right. And when I watched the old episodes on Pluto TV, which now has the Price is Right channel, either they didn't have a lettering guide yet, or the pages were ignoring it, because the price tags on the 1982 episodes look so wrong to me, and it's distracting.
And quick little story as well. When I went to my first Price is Right taping in 2003, well, it feels a long time ago, my friend and I went, and for those of you who don't know, you have to have your legal name on your tag. So if you go by Robbie, you have to go by Robert. That's just the way it is. Otherwise, you can't get prizes. So you'll put your legal name on that tag because you'll be happy to get that stuff. And my friend's name is Chris. He's known as Christopher, but they wrote Christopher. And we had to give the tag back, and they would not let him keep it. And it became a running joke. And to this day, I have him on my phone 20 years later as Chis. But when I went back in 2005, I told the story to a page, and they were nice enough to give me a blank tag. I wrote on it, and that was part of his wedding gift.
Oh, that's nice. I broke that rule a few times. You're not supposed to do that, but it's... Oh, I hope no one from CBS is listening. Every now and then, a very sweet-faced person would say, I promised some relatives back home that I would ask, could I get like 3 or 4 extra name tags? And I would look around like this, and I'd palm them 4 name tags, and they would tuck them quietly in their purses. And
but also
ultimately, I think that's why I'm no longer working at CBS, because they found out I was doing that, and it cost them a good 30 cents. While we're talking about we were talking about iconic prizes from game shows, the quintessential Canadian prize. I will show you the closest thing that America had to a quote-unquote Canadian prize on a game show. This is my memento from my years, from my time working at Wheel of Fortune. Wheel of Fortune in the 1980s, when the contestants went shopping for prizes, had a ceramic Dalmatian that they offered very often. And for Christmas, the year that I worked at Wheel of Fortune, every employee got a miniature ceramic Dalmatian with a bobblehead. It has this little tag that gives you the entire history of the bobblehead. The ceramic Dalmatian's name is Sheldon, for anyone who's wondering this. And the story, as it was explained to me, I don't know 100% that this is the truth, but NBC, as I understand it, had an employee in charge of getting game show prizes named Sheldon Link, who went out shopping for prizes and came across a ceramic Dalmatian somehow, and was so instantly enamored and fixated by it that he placed a bulk order, which Wheel of Fortune looked at and said, why did you get so many ceramic Dalmatians? So as an inside joke, they named the ceramic Dalmatian Sheldon, and this thing was on Wheel of Fortune forever in the 1980s, while they tried to give away the massive stock that Sheldon offered. Again, I don't know if that story is true, but that's the story that was explained.
But that's a great story. And listen, we all associate the 80s shopping of Wheel of Fortune with the ceramic Dalmatian. And I know of people that were on the show in the 80s and were very bitter that when they won their round, they didn't get to shop in that kind of showcase. We have a question from Glorioski. Thanks for the question. It says, what do you think further the Canadian prizes are cheap stereotype? The prizes themselves, the potential for long syndication runs, or a mix of the two? I'm going to just say something quickly to that. It's interesting to note there's a lot of shows that got made, especially I feel in the 80s and early 90s, that were made, and they were made in Canada, but things like Bumper Stumpers, Chain Reaction, Jackpot, Love Me Not were very much made for the US market in essence.
But the interesting thing about that is the shows that you named, I think, Love Me Not, it's been too long since I've watched, but I know Jackpot and Chain Reaction were pretty strictly cash shows.
That's correct, yes.
So, yeah, so there wasn't much of a chance for the stereotypical Canadian prize to slip in there, which that may have been by design.
So what do you think would be that stereotype then? Because to be honest with you, I don't think it's an entirely a fair stereotype. When I've told people, when I went on Inside the Box, the grand prize is $10,000 on a Canadian game show? Really? And that was 15 years ago. Like that's a reasonable amount of money, right?
One of the things that was touched on is, it is kind of a weird stereotype because especially in America, there is a wide mix of prizes that get given away on game shows too, and we all have the year's supply of Rice-A-Roni and the Turtle Wax, and that's a stereotype here in the U.S. Or Bob Barker would joke about refrigerators all the time. Whenever Bob was greeted by an audience in some form other than The Price is Right, he would always greet them with his line, "I wish I had a refrigerator to give to everybody." So refrigerator was the stereotypical prize for America, essentially. And it's just, I think it spices things up to have something that is a little different. Bob Stewart, who created the original version of The Price is Right, had a theory about game show prizes, which was you do need to offer oddball prizes. You need to go a little bit off the wall with them because if you sit somebody down, as Bob Stewart put it, if you sit somebody down and ask them to write 10 prizes that they'd like to win on a game show, they would write down a car, maybe a boat, a trip to some destination, and then after they had written down those 3, they'd be stuck for items to fill out the rest of the list. And they might write down another model of car, and they might write down a trip to another destination. But for all intents and purposes, if you're the person producing The Price is Right, a car is a car, and a trip is a trip, and a boat is a boat. So you need a weird prize like a fire escape ladder or a cheeseburger-shaped telephone or something like that, just for something different, for something to grab the audience's attention and say, "Oh, what's that?"
So just to wrap up here, Adam, so let's put it in a theoretical situation. You have a comedian hosting a reboot of a Canadian show with a very quintessential Canadian prize. And for this purpose, let's, because you may not know every Canadian we've ever had host a show. If you need to go off the board and name an American comedian to host a Canadian show,
are we talking living or dead? I mean, what are the parameters?
Whatever you would, let's say a living comedian.
A living comedian. All right. Let's see. Is Jim Carrey working these days? What would be kind of fun, just as
I know people, by the way, that thought Jim Carrey got the job on The Price is Right.
I think it would be a lot of fun just as a one-off special and just to tie in these two pop culture elements together. I think it would be neat, just like as a special for charity, have Mike Myers host a night of definition. Do it as a primetime special, play it for charity.
Great idea.
And tie in with Austin Powers and definition and the theme music that unites them. And as I understand it, Mike Myers pretty much picked out that theme music as a wink, wink, nudge, nudge to his countrymen.
Oh, I'm sure of it. No doubt in my mind.
I think it would be kind of cute to do that for one night.
And
even
what should we give away for the prize?
What they should give away for the prize?
Let's say we're giving.
I would say a fire escape crock pot. Just a crock pot with a little ladder on the side of it in case the food in the crock pot gets a little too hot. You can bring your spoon down the little ladder on the side, and it'll be safe.
Well, you know what? I had a chili spoon when I was a kid that had a little ladder. So the idea is that you made chili and the little, toots would escape. So I have that somewhere. Thank you, Mom and Dad. So just want you to know before we wrap up, Adam and I are very happy to come and work on the charity version of Definition.
Yes.
Mike Myers, when you watch this, I'm going to say when, not if. We're happy to have you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us here. Tomorrow night's our season finale. That'll be episode 205, which is the future of game shows. That's at 7 p.m. Eastern. We'll be back on here at 8 p.m. tomorrow. Please follow us on the socials. You can catch bonus clips on our YouTube channel, our website, and the Game TV website. I will be back tomorrow night. And first, before I say that, thank you so much, Adam, for taking the time. I know that you have other business you do, and I know you took some time away from that. I really do appreciate it, and I know our viewers do as well.
I mean, I crave attention, as I told you off the air. So any opportunity to take to
and it's been a pleasure to have
me.
you on both seasons of the Truth
Yeah.
for Canadian Game Shows.
Again, my name Adam Nedeff, ADAM
Yes,
NEDEFF. Do a search for that on Barnes and Noble, Amazon.com, or wherever your favorite books are sold. I got plenty of them on sale and plenty more to come.
Yes, and you have done some someone with we have some Canadian Game Show twists in there, correct?
Absolutely, yes. A biography of Monty Hall is on the way. Date to be announced, but it is in the publisher's hands and is being edited as we speak.
Wonderful. So I'll be back tomorrow night with our special guest will be the host of the Canadian version of Supermarket Sweep, Tino Monti, and he'll be joining us at 8 p.m. Eastern. Thank you so much, everyone. Bye-bye for now. Have a great night. Take care. And we are done.